I smiled at Edric across the dinner table, hiding the rage in my heart. He thought I was the same trusting, loving woman he betrayed before. How wrong he was. In my past life, I gave him everything: my inheritance, my connections, my heart. Then my beautiful sister returned, and suddenly I wasn't enough. I found them together the night before our wedding. Edric laughed as he told me I was just a stepping stone to wealth and power. My sisters smirked while wearing my mother's necklace. They humiliated me, cast me out, and left me to die alone. But fate gave me another chance. I was reborn 2 years earlier with my memories intact. This time, as they plot behind my back, I'm watching and waiting. They chose each other once before. Now I'll watch them burn together. I was born into the prestigious Ravian family as the eldest daughter, a position that carried both privilege and responsibility. From a young age, I understood that my future would be defined by strategic alliances and advantageous marriages. That knowledge never bothered me until I met Edric Valerian, the man who would become my fiancé and eventually my greatest regret. Edric was everything a noble woman could want in a husband. Tall with honey-brown hair that caught the sunlight, eyes the color of storm clouds, and a smile that seemed to hold secrets meant only for me. He had charm, ambition, and just enough noble blood to make him acceptable to my father. What he lacked in wealth and connections, he made up for with business acumen and social grace. I fell for him completely. Our courtship was brief but intense. Edric wooed me with poetry and promises of a future where we would rule society together. When he proposed after only 6 months, I accepted without hesitation. My father, Lord Ravian, was initially hesitant about the match, but Edric won him over with plans for expanding our family's trading empire. He has potential, Father told me one evening as we sat in his study. But potential without resources rarely blooms. You will need to invest in him, Vena. I did not hesitate. Over the next 3 years, I poured everything I had into Edric. My substantial inheritance from my late mother went to establishing his business ventures. My connections among the nobility opened doors that would have remained forever closed to him. My knowledge of commerce, gained from years at my father's side, guided his decisions, and my heart, my foolish, trusting heart, gave him the confidence to reach higher than he ever could alone. We are unstoppable together, Edric would whisper as he held me close. Everything I am becoming is because of you, my love. I believed him. I believed every word, every touch, every promise. Under my guidance and support, Edric's status in society soared. He became known as a brilliant businessman, a charming host, and the perfect match for the eldest Ravian daughter. Our wedding was set for the summer solstice, just 3 months away, and preparations had already begun for what would be the social event of the season. Life seemed perfect until my sister returned. Lyrian had been away for almost 4 years, studying at the prestigious Academy of Arts in the neighboring kingdom. When she left, she had been a gainly girl of 16 with more ambition than grace. The woman who returned was nothing like the sister I remembered. Lyrian arrived on a rainy spring day, stepping from the carriage like a vision. Her hair, the same rich auburn as mine but somehow more vibrant, cascaded down her back in perfect waves. Her eyes, a shade of green so deep they appeared almost black in certain light, took in everything with calculating intelligence. Her figure had filled out in all the right places, her movements were graceful, her laugh musical. She was everything I had never been perfect. "Vena, dear sister," she exclaimed, embracing me with practiced warmth. "How I have missed you, and this must be your Edric. I have heard so much about you, sir." I did not miss the way Edric's eyes lingered on her as he bowed over her hand. I told myself it was nothing, that any man would appreciate such beauty. But something cold settled in my stomach that day, a premonition I tried desperately to ignore. The changes in Edric were subtle at first. He became distracted during our conversations, his mind clearly elsewhere. Our intimate moments grew less frequent, and when they did occur, I sensed a new hesitation in his touch, as if he were holding back. He began receiving mysterious messages, excusing himself to attend to sudden business matters that he never fully explained. "It is just wedding nerves," my lady's maid assured me when I confided my worries. "All men become strange as the day approaches." I wanted to believe her. After all, what alternative explanation could there be? Edric loved me. We had built everything together. In just a few months, we would be husband and wife. Then came the first dinner party following Lyrian's return. I wore my finest gown, a creation of midnight blue silk that had been made specifically to complement the Ravian family's sapphires Edric had insisted I wear. He had given me little attention as I dressed, claiming to be preoccupied with business correspondence. The evening began pleasantly enough. Our home, a townhouse purchased with my inheritance but decorated to Edric's taste, filled with the nobility and wealthy merchants who formed our social circle. I played hostess with practiced ease, ensuring every guest felt welcomed and important. I was speaking with Countess Marielle when I realized I had not seen Edric for some time. Excusing myself, I searched the main rooms without success. A servant mentioned seeing him heading toward the gardens, so I followed, expecting to find him enjoying a moment of solitude away from the crowd. What I found instead was Edric standing far too close to Lyrian beneath the rose arbor. They were not touching, not quite, but the space between them hummed with an energy I recognized all too well. It was the same energy that had once existed between Edric and me, in those early, intoxicating days of our courtship. "You are playing a dangerous game," Lyrian was saying, her voice low and thrilling. "Some games are worth the risk," Edric replied, his gaze never leaving her face. I stepped back into the shadows before they could notice me, my heart pounding so loudly I feared they would hear it. That night, as Edric slept beside me, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, telling myself I had misunderstood what I had seen. My sister and my fiancé would never betray me so cruelly. It had to be a misunderstanding. But in the days that followed, Edric grew even more distant. He began finding excuses to leave our home at odd hours. Sometimes I would wake in the night to find his side of the bed empty, only for him to return at dawn claiming he had been working. His kisses became perfunctory, his conversations stilted. When we discussed wedding plans, he seemed almost impatient, suggesting we postpone until winter. "But everything is arranged," I protested. "The invitations, the venue, my dress." "Arrangements can be changed," he replied dismissively. "There is no rush, is there?" I did not know what to think. 3 years of my life had been invested in this man, in our future together. I could not bring myself to imagine that it had all been for nothing, that the love I thought we shared had somehow evaporated. But as the banquet celebrating our upcoming wedding approached, the whispers began. The banquet hall gleamed with golden light. Crystal goblets clinked, laughter bubbled, and hundreds of candles cast flickering shadows across the walls of my father's grand estate. The event was ostensibly to celebrate my upcoming marriage to Edric, yet I felt strangely disconnected from the festivities, as if I were watching a play where someone else wore my face. I stood near the head table, greeting nobles and merchants alike with practiced smiles and polite conversation. My gown, a masterpiece of ivory silk embroidered with silver thread, had cost a small fortune. The Ravian family diamonds glittered at my throat and wrists. I looked every inch the bride-to-be, even as doubt gnawed at my heart. "You must be so excited for the wedding," Lady Durrell gushed, her voice pitched to Carrie. "Though I imagine waiting for the summer solstice feels like an eternity." "Good things come to those who wait," I replied with a practiced smile. "Indeed," she said, her eyes sliding past me. "Though I wonder if some find waiting harder than others." I followed her gaze across the room to where Edric stood laughing with a group of merchants. As if sensing my attention, he glanced over and raised his glass in a distant toast before turning back to his companions. Not once in the 2 hours since the banquet began had he sought me out or stood by my side. "If you will excuse me," I murmured to Lady Durrell, making my way through the crowd toward my father. Lord Ravian, imposing even in his 6th decade, was deep in conversation with Duke Mareth. They broke off as I approached, my father's brow furrowing slightly at whatever he saw in my expression. "Vena, my dear. Is everything all right?" "Of course, father. I merely wish to thank you again for hosting such a magnificent celebration." The Duke excused himself and my father took my hand in his. "You seem troubled. Second thoughts about Edric?" "No," I lied, the word bitter on my tongue. "Everything is perfect." His eyes, the same deep green as mine, studied me too carefully. "I have always trusted your judgment, Vena. If there is anything amiss, you need only say the word." For a moment, I was tempted to confide in him, to share the growing dread that had taken root in my chest. But such an admission would require evidence I did not yet possess. Instead, I squeezed his hand and forced a brighter smile. "The only thing amiss is that I have barely seen my fiancé this evening. I should go find him." I moved away before he could question me further, weaving through the crowd with determination. Edric was nowhere to be seen, nor was Lyrian. Their simultaneous absence sent a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with the spring evening. Near the terrace doors, I overheard a whispered conversation between two young noblewomen. The sister, can you believe it? Right under her nose. She invests everything in him, and he turns around and, well, you know. Shh, she might hear you. They fell silent as I passed, their faces flushing with guilt. I pretended not to notice, maintaining my composure even as their words confirmed my worst fears. The whispers were not just in my imagination. Others had seen what I had been too blind to acknowledge. Outside on the terrace, the cool night air provided brief relief from the stuffiness of the banquet hall. I leaned against the stone balustrade, gathering my strength. A servant approached with a tray of wine, and I took a glass, downing half of it in one swallow. Careful, Lady Vena. That vintage is stronger than it tastes. I turned to find Baron Thelix watching me with concern. The older man had been my father's friend for decades and had always treated me with kindly respect. Perhaps I needed strength tonight, Baron. He moved closer, lowering his voice. Forgive my presumption, but I feel I would be remiss not to speak. There are rumors, my lady. Rumors concerning your fiancé and your sister. I met his gaze directly. What sort of rumors? The sort that, if true, would demand action from a man of honor. He hesitated. I have seen them myself, leaving Lord Varish's hunting lodge on several occasions. They did not appear to be engaging in sibling bonding. The glass nearly slipped from my fingers. Lord Varish's property bordered our estate to the north, but he rarely used it, preferring his coastal residence. It would be the perfect place for clandestine meetings. Thank you for your honesty, I said quietly. If you will excuse me, I find I need a moment alone. I slipped away from the terrace, moving not back to the banquet but toward the east wing of the estate where family quarters were located. My mind worked furiously, connecting pieces of a puzzle I had not wanted to solve. The late-night absences, the growing coldness, the way Lyrian always seemed to know exactly where Edric would be. My bedchamber offered momentary sanctuary. I changed quickly into a simple dark dress, covered my distinctive auburn hair with a hood, and slipped out through the servants' passages. No one questioned me as I made my way to the stables and selected a gentle mare. Just a short ride to clear my head, I told the stable boy who helped me mount. No need to inform anyone. The ride to Lord Varish's hunting lodge took less than 20 minutes. The building sat dark against the night sky, no lights visible from the main approach. For a moment I thought the Baron had been mistaken, but then I noticed a faint golden glow from a window at the rear. Tethering my mare to a tree, I approached on foot, staying in the shadows. The lodge was modest by noble standards, just a handful of rooms built of stone and timber. I circled to the back, where the illuminated window beckoned. I did not have to press my face to the glass to see them. The curtains were partially open, revealing the main room of the lodge. A fire burned in the hearth, casting enough light to clearly identify the two figures entwined on the settee. Edric and Lyrian. My sister sat astride his lap, her dress unlaced to reveal her bare back. Edric's hands roamed freely over her skin as they kissed with passionate abandon. There was nothing furtive or guilty in their embrace, just hunger and obvious familiarity. This was not their first assignation. I stepped back, a strange calm settling over me. Part of me had known this truth for weeks, perhaps months. Seeing it confirmed brought not shock but a cold, clear certainty. Without thinking, I moved to the front door of the lodge and pushed it open. They did not hear me enter. I stood in the doorway to the main room, watching them for several long seconds before speaking. I suppose congratulations are in order. They sprang apart, Lyrian clutching her bodice closed while Edric leaped to his feet. His expression shifted rapidly from shock to guilt to something harder, more calculating. Vena, he said, straightening his clothing with practiced nonchalance. This is not how we wanted you to find out. And how exactly did you plan to inform me that my fiancé and my sister had become lovers? My voice sounded strangely calm to my own ears. Perhaps an announcement at the wedding breakfast. Lyrian recovered quickly, her initial embarrassment hardening into defiance. It was never supposed to be you, Vena. Edric and I met first, years ago at the summer court before I left for the academy. We had a connection. Even then, a connection you neglected to mention in your letters, I replied. or when you returned and greeted him as a stranger. Edric moved toward me, hands outstretched in a placating gesture. Vena, be reasonable. These things happen. Hearts change. Surely you would not want me to marry you while loving another. Love, I repeated, the word like ash in my mouth. Is that what you call this betrayal? His expression shifted then, the mask of contrition falling away to reveal something colder, more calculating. Do not play the wounded innocent, Vena. Ours was always an arrangement of convenience. Your wealth and connections, my charm and business acumen, it served us both well. You used me, I whispered, the full truth finally dawning. All this time. Used is such an ugly word, he replied with a shrug. I preferred to think of it as a mutually beneficial partnership. But now circumstances have changed. Lyrian approached, her dress hastily relaced. We did not want to hurt you, sister. But Edric and I share something real, something you and he never had. And what might that be? Besides a complete lack of honor or decency. Edric's face hardened. Enough dramatics. What is done is done. He walked to a desk in the corner, removing a folded document. I have taken the liberty of preparing an annulment. Your signature will allow us all to move forward with dignity. I stared at the parchment he held out, unable to comprehend the cold brutality of it. 3 years of my life, my heart, my fortune, all to be dismissed with a signature. You expect me to simply step aside, to give you my blessing? I expect you to be practical, he replied. The alternative would be a very public scandal, which would benefit none of us. This way you retain some dignity. Lyrian moved to stand beside him, placing a possessive hand on his arm. It is for the best, Vena. Father will be angry at first, but he will come to accept us. You have always been the practical one. Do not let emotion cloud your judgment now. I left the hunting lodge in a daze, the signed annulment papers clutched in Edric's victorious hands. The night air felt too thick to breathe as I mounted my mare and rode blindly away from the scene of my humiliation. Not toward my father's estate, where the banquet celebrating my now-defunct engagement continued in ignorance, but toward the city. Within days, the scandal broke across society like a summer storm. As Edric had predicted, my father's initial rage gave way to pragmatic acceptance. The Ravian family could not afford public disgrace, and Lyrian, ever the favorite, convinced him that her marriage to Edric would salvage the family's investments and honor. I became the unfortunate footnote, the elder daughter whose fiancé had found love with her sister. Pitied by some, mocked by others, but ultimately forgotten. My father provided me with a modest allowance and a small townhouse on the unfashionable side of the city. It was meant as a kindness, a chance to rebuild my life away from the daily reminder of betrayal. But the reality was exile, plain and simple. My presence would have been an inconvenient reminder of what Edric and Lyrian had done. The first month passed in a fog of grief and rage. I barely left my new home, sending servants for necessities and turning away the few visitors who came out of duty rather than genuine concern. My lady's maid, Thessa, remained loyal, managing the household with quiet efficiency while I struggled to imagine a future I had never planned for. You must eat something, Lady Vena, she would insist, placing trays of untouched food by my bedside. Starving yourself will not punish them, only you. She was right, of course. My self-imposed isolation served no purpose except to reinforce the narrative Edric and Lyrian had crafted that I was a broken woman, incapable of facing society after my humiliation. Gradually, I forced myself to emerge from my cocoon of misery. I began by taking short walks through the city, reacquainting myself with a world that had continued without me. I visited small shops and cafes, places where the nobility rarely ventured and my face would not be recognized. In these anonymous spaces, I slowly relearned how to breathe, how to interact with others without constantly wondering if they knew my shame. 6 weeks after the scandal, I received an unexpected visitor. Baron Thelix, my father's old friend who had first warned me about Edric and Lyrian, arrived at my townhouse one rainy afternoon. I hope you will forgive the intrusion, he said as Thessa showed him to my small sitting room. I have been concerned about your welfare. His kindness nearly undid me. After weeks of isolation, having someone look at me with genuine concern rather than pity or judgment was almost more than I could bear. There is nothing to forgive, I replied, gesturing for him to sit. You were the only one honest enough to tell me the truth. The Baron's weathered face softened. I wish I had spoken sooner. Perhaps then. It would have made no difference, I interrupted. Edric made his choice long before you saw them together. Nothing could have changed that. We spoke for over an hour, not about my disgrace but about practical matters. The Baron had business interests in the southern provinces and was looking for someone to manage his accounts and correspondence. The position would require intelligence, discretion, and a knowledge of commerce, all qualities he believed I possessed in abundance. It would mean leaving the city, he explained. My estate in Meridian Province is quite remote, but the distance might be a blessing in disguise. I accepted his offer without hesitation. There was nothing for me in the capital except painful memories and whispered gossip. Within a fortnight I had packed my modest belongings and bid farewell to the few servants who had remained loyal. Vesa insisted on accompanying me, refusing to consider any other outcome. The journey to Meridian Province took 8 days by coach. As we traveled southward, I felt the weight of the past few months gradually lifting. By the time we arrived at Baron Felix's country estate, a sprawling but comfortable manor nestled among rolling vineyards, I had begun to imagine a future where I might find, if not happiness, then at least purpose. The Baron was a generous employer, providing me with comfortable quarters and work that engaged my mind. I quickly proved my worth, streamlining his business operations and suggesting innovations that increased the productivity of his vineyards. For the first time in my life, I was valued for my intellect rather than my family name or marriageable potential. Months passed, then a year. News from the capital reached us occasionally. Edric and Lyrian had married in a lavish ceremony, using what remained of my investment to secure their position in society. My father had given them his blessing, though rumors suggested his health had begun to fail afterward. I read these accounts with growing detachment, as if they described strangers rather than people who had once been the center of my world. Then came the letter that changed everything. My father had died suddenly of heart failure. As his eldest daughter, I was expected to return for the funeral and the reading of his will. The thought of facing Edric and Lyrian again filled me with dread, but duty demanded my presence. Baron Felix insisted on accompanying me, a kindness for which I was profoundly grateful. We arrived at the Ravian estate on a cold autumn morning, greeted by servants who barely recognized the woman I had become. Gone was the soft, trusting girl who had left in disgrace. In her place stood someone harder, leaner, with eyes that revealed nothing of her thoughts. The funeral proceeded with all the pomp my father's physician demanded. I stood stoically beside Lyrian, who wore her widow's grief like a costume, dabbing at dry eyes with a black lace handkerchief. Edric remained at her side, his hand possessively on her waist, his expression appropriately sullen except when his gaze met mine. Then I saw a flicker of something else. Calculation, perhaps, or concern. The reading of the will provided the first real surprise. My father, despite apparently accepting Lyrian's marriage to Edric, had not changed his testament. As his eldest daughter, I received the bulk of his personal fortune and control of several key business interests. Lyrian inherited our mother's jewels and a modest annual allowance, while the family estate was to be jointly owned but under my primary governance. This cannot be right, Lyrian protested as the solicitor finished reading. Father promised me. The document is quite clear, Lady Lyrian, the solicitor replied, unperturbed by her outburst. Lord Ravian made no changes to his will in the 18 months before his death. I said nothing, allowing the implications to settle over the room like dust. With my father's death, the balance of power had shifted dramatically. Edric, who had built his position on my sister's anticipated inheritance, now found himself married to a woman with little more than her beauty to recommend her. That night, as I prepared for bed in my old chambers, a knock came at my door. I opened it to find Edric standing in the corridor, his face a mask of contrition. "Vena, we must talk," he said, attempting to step inside. I blocked his entry. "We have nothing to discuss." "Do not be childish," he snapped, his facade slipping. "Your father's will changes everything. Surely you see that we must come to an arrangement." "An arrangement," I repeated, the word like poison on my tongue. "Like the one where you used me as a stepping stone to wealth and position, then discarded me when something prettier caught your eye." His expression hardened. "The past is done. We must think of the future. The businesses, the estate, they require experienced management. My management. How convenient for you," I replied coldly. "Unfortunately, I no longer require your services. As I moved to close the door, he caught it with his hand, his fingers accidentally grazing mine. The contact sent a jolt of revulsion through me so powerful that I stumbled backward. In that moment of weakness, Edric pushed his way into my chamber. "You will listen to reason," he insisted, advancing toward me. "Everything I built with your father's businesses, everything I accomplished. Everything you stole," I corrected him, backing away. "Using my investment, my connections, my trust." He grabbed my wrist, his grip painfully tight. "Do not play the innocent. You knew our marriage was a business arrangement from the start. Let go of me," I demanded, fear and fury mingling in my chest. "Not until you agree to discuss terms. I will not let you destroy everything I have worked for." What happened next occurred with terrifying speed. As I struggled to free myself, Edric's grip tightened. I lost my balance, falling backward against the marble hearth with devastating force. Pain exploded through my skull and darkness began to close in around me. The last thing I saw was Edric's face, not with concern or remorse, but with calculation as he watched me bleed. The last thing I heard was his voice calling for help, already crafting the narrative of a tragic accident. My last thought was a curse, a plea for justice that followed me into the void. Then came light, blinding and absolute. When it faded, I found myself staring at a familiar ceiling. Not the ceiling of my chamber at the Ravian estate, but of my bedroom in the townhouse Edric and I had shared before our wedding. Before the betrayal, before my death, I sat up, gasping, my hands flying to the back of my head where no wound existed. Sunlight streamed through partially opened curtains, illuminating a room I had not seen in nearly 2 years. On the bedside table lay an invitation to a banquet celebrating my engagement to Edric Valerian, dated exactly 2 years before the day I had died. "Lady Vena," called the voice I had thought never to hear again. "Are you awake? Lord Edric has sent word he will call for you at noon." Vesa entered the bedchamber carrying a breakfast tray, completely unaware that her mistress was experiencing the impossible. I stared at her, drinking in the sight of my faithful lady's maid who had followed me into exile and whom I had believed lost forever. "You look pale, my lady," she remarked, setting down the tray and moving to open the curtains fully. "Did you not sleep well?" I could barely find my voice. "What day is it?" "The 15th of May, my lady. Your sister returns from the academy today, and Lord Edric wishes to accompany you to welcome her." Lyrian's return. The beginning of the end in my previous life, except this was not some continuation of my life beyond death. Somehow, impossibly, I had been sent back to the exact moment when everything began to unravel. Before Edric's betrayal. Before my humiliation and exile. Before my death. "My lady? Are you unwell?" I forced myself to breathe normally. "Just a strange dream, Thessa. It has left me disoriented." She nodded sympathetically and began laying out my clothes for the day. The blue silk dress that Edric had once claimed was his favorite. The sapphire earrings he had gifted me on our engagement. The silver hairpins that had taken an hour to arrange properly. All familiar, all exactly as they had been before. As Thessa helped me dress, my mind raced through possibilities. Was this some dying fantasy, my brain's final gift as I built out on the marble hearth? Was it a chance to relive my final moments differently? Or had fate truly given me an opportunity to rewrite history? Whatever the explanation, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I would not be fooled again. "There," Thessa said, stepping back to admire her handiwork. "Lord Edric will be enchanted, as always." I studied my reflection in the mirror. The woman who gazed back looked younger than I remembered, her eyes brighter, her expression more open. She had not yet experienced betrayal or exile or death. But behind those eyes lived a woman who had, and who would never forget. When Edric arrived to escort me to my father's estate, I was prepared. I greeted him with the same loving smile I had always shown, accepted his kiss with practiced ease, and listened attentively as he spoke of business matters and social engagements. To all outward appearances, I was the same devoted fiancée I had been before. Only I knew the cold fury that lay beneath my calm exterior. Only I recognized the calculated charm in his manner, the subtle manipulations in his conversation. How had I ever been blind to them? "You seem pensive today," he remarked as our carriage rolled toward my father's estate. "Nervous about your sister's return. Should I be?" I asked, watching his reaction carefully. A momentary flicker crossed his face, so brief I would have missed it had I not been looking for it. "Of course not. I was merely observing your mood. I am eager to see how she has changed, I replied with deliberate ambiguity. 4 years at the academy must have transformed her considerably. He nodded, apparently relieved by my explanation. Education broadens one's horizons. I am sure she returns with many new ideas and perspectives. And talents, I thought grimly. Like how to steal another woman's fiancé. At my father's estate, servants bustled about preparing for Lyrian's arrival. I moved through the familiar rooms with a strange sense of déjà vu, knowing exactly what would happen before it occurred. The housekeeper would worry about the floral arrangements. The cook would panic about Lyrian's favorite dessert. My father would pace his study, simultaneously proud of his younger daughter's accomplishments and anxious about the expense of her education. Everything unfolded exactly as I remembered, a performance where I alone knew the script. When Lyrian's carriage finally arrived, I stood beside my father on the front steps, watching Edric from the corner of my eye. His expression remained politely interested until the moment my sister emerged. There it was, the flicker of recognition, the moment of true seeing that I had missed the first time. Edric had known Lyrian before, just as she had claimed in our confrontation at the hunting lodge. The connection between them had existed long before her return. I smiled sweetly as Lyrian embraced me, her practiced warmth no longer fooling me. "Welcome home, sister. How we have missed you." "Vena, you look wonderful," she exclaimed, holding me at arm's length to examine me. "Engagement clearly agrees with you." When Edric stepped forward to be introduced, I watched their performance with newfound clarity. The careful distance they maintained, the formal greetings, the deliberate avoidance of prolonged eye contact, all signs of people with something to hide. "Lord Edric Valerian," my father announced, "Vena's fiancé and a rising star in the Merchant Guild. A pleasure to make your acquaintance." "Lady Lyrian," Edric said, bowing over her hand with precisely the right degree of respect. "Your sister has spoken of you often." "All good things, I hope," Lyrian replied with a laugh that sounded genuine to everyone but me. That evening, as we dined together as a family for the first time in 4 years, I observed the subtle dance between Edric and Lyrian. The careful positioning that allowed brief, seemingly accidental touches, the shared glances when they thought no one was watching, the inside jokes disguised as general conversation. In my previous life, I had been oblivious to it all, too trusting and too in love to see the betrayal unfolding before my eyes. Now, armed with foreknowledge, I saw every move in their elaborate game. And I began to plan my counter moves. The next morning, I rose early and sent a message to my father's solicitor requesting an urgent meeting. By midday, I had signed documents transferring a significant portion of my inheritance to a separate account under my sole control. Not enough to raise suspicion, but sufficient to ensure I would never again be left destitute. "This is unusual," the solicitor remarked as he witnessed my signature. "Most young ladies prefer to consolidate finances with their future husbands. Consider it a prudent precaution," I replied. "Even the happiest marriages can face unexpected challenges." Over the following weeks, I maintained the facade of the perfect fiancé. I supported Edric at social functions, consulted with him on business matters, and shared his bed with apparent enthusiasm. To the world, we remained the ideal couple, blessed with wealth, position, and mutual devotion. Behind this mask, however, I methodically disentangled our finances. I discreetly recalled investments from his business ventures, redirecting them through intermediaries to more secure opportunities. I established connections with merchants and nobles independent of Edric's influence. I cultivated relationships with powerful women who controlled their own fortunes, learning from their examples how to protect my interests. Most crucially, I won my father's absolute trust. Where once I had deferred to his judgment in business matters, I now offered insights and suggestions that proved remarkably prescient. Several of my investment recommendations yielded substantial returns, enhancing both his fortune and his confidence in my abilities. "You have developed quite a head for commerce," he observed one evening as we reviewed the quarterly accounts together. "Edric's influence, I presume?" "I have always had an aptitude for numbers," I replied, "but recent events have taught me the importance of financial independence." My father raised an eyebrow. "Trouble in paradise?" "No," I said quickly. "Merely a recognition that a wise woman ensures her own security, regardless of her marital status." He studied me thoughtfully. "Your mother would be proud. She always said you had her practical nature. As my position with my father strengthened, I subtly worked to undermine Lyrian's favored status, not through petty jealousy or obvious competition, but by positioning myself as the more reliable daughter. I ensured I was available when my father needed assistance. I remembered details about his business associates that facilitated important connections. I anticipated his needs before he expressed them. Meanwhile, I encouraged Lyrian's natural tendency towards self-centered behavior. When she complained about the dullness of provincial life after the excitement of the academy, I sympathized and suggested she attend every social function available. When she expressed boredom with family dinners, I assured her that father understood her need for stimulation and would not be offended by her absence. "You are so good to me, Vena," she said one afternoon as I helped her select jewelry for yet another social engagement. "Most sisters would resent my constant socializing while they plan a wedding." "Why would I resent your happiness?" I replied, fastening a diamond necklace around her throat. "Besides, wedding preparations proceed more smoothly without constant interruptions." She laughed, oblivious to the double meaning in my words. "True, and Edric seems to have everything well in hand. Such a capable man." "Very capable," I agreed, meeting her eyes in the mirror. "Though sometimes I wonder if he takes on too much responsibility." "What do you mean?" I shrugged, planting the seed deliberately. "He seems stretched thin lately. Business concerns, wedding preparations, social obligations. I worry he leaves himself no time for relaxation." The bait was taken instantly. "Perhaps he needs more diversions," Lyrian suggested, her tone carefully casual. "A hunting expedition or an evening at the theater." "Perhaps," I agreed, though I find my time equally consumed these days. Father has been involving me more directly in family business matters. A flicker of annoyance crossed her face. "Father always did favor your practical nature." "As he favors your artistic talents," I countered smoothly. "We each have our gifts." Thus I laid the groundwork for what was to come. With subtle manipulations and careful positioning, I created a situation where Edric and Lyrian believed they were cleverly deceiving me, while in reality, every secret meeting and stolen glance occurred exactly when and where I intended. All the while, I gathered evidence of Edric's less ethical business practices. Anonymous tips to key guild members ensured his activities came under increasing scrutiny. Carefully worded concerns shared with trusted associates planted seeds of doubt about his methods. Never enough to trigger immediate action, but sufficient to ensure that when the time came, his fall would be swift and complete. By the time the date for our grand engagement banquet approached once more, all my pieces were in place. The stage was set, the actors unaware that the script had changed. Edric and Lyrian believed they controlled the narrative, that in a matter of days they would announce their love and begin their life together, leaving me humiliated but ultimately powerless. How wrong they were. The morning of the banquet dawned bright and clear, sunlight streaming through my bedroom windows as if nature itself approved of what was to come. I lay in bed for a moment, savoring the knowledge that after tonight, my path would irrevocably diverge from the tragic course of my previous life. Vessa bustled about the room, laying out the gown I had commissioned specifically for this occasion. Not the demure blue silk of my first life, but a creation of deep crimson velvet that whispered of power rather than innocence. The Ravian family rubies gleamed on my dressing table, their blood-red depths a fitting symbol for the evening ahead. "Are you nervous, my lady?" Vessa asked as she arranged my hair in an elegant but severe style that emphasized the sharp angles of my face. "Not at all," I replied truthfully. "I have been preparing for this night for a very long time." The townhouse felt strangely empty with Edric already gone. He had left at dawn, claiming urgent business matters required his attention before the banquet. I knew exactly where he was and what urgent business occupied him. The hunting lodge would be seeing its final assignation today. I spent the morning reviewing documents with my father's solicitor, who had arrived promptly at 9 with the papers I had requested. By midday, the last of my preparations was complete. All that remained was to dress for battle and arrive at the battlefield. My father's estate was transformed for the occasion. Hundreds of lanterns illuminated the gardens, their soft glow complemented by masses of white, roses, and silver ribbons. The grand ballroom gleamed with polished marble and crystal, while the banquet tables in the adjoining hall were set with the finest china and silver. An army of servants moved efficiently through the spaces, ensuring every detail was perfect. Lord Ravian greeted me in the private family parlor, his eyes widening slightly at my appearance. "You look formidable tonight, daughter. A bride should command attention, should she not?" I replied, accepting his kiss on my cheek. Indeed, he studied me with newfound respect. "The ruby suite was your mother's favorite. She would be pleased to see you wear it so well." Guests began arriving as twilight descended. Nobility and wealthy merchants, guild leaders and foreign dignitaries, all gathered to celebrate the union of two prominent families. I moved among them with practiced grace, accepting congratulations and well wishes with a serene smile that revealed nothing of my true thoughts. Edric arrived fashionably late, immaculately dressed and wearing the confident smile of a man who believes himself the master of his destiny. If he was surprised by my choice of attire, he concealed it well, taking my hand and pressing it to his lips with practiced devotion. "You are a vision, my love," he murmured. Though I confess, I expected the blue silk. I felt a change was in order, I replied. "After all, this is a night for new beginnings." A flicker of uncertainty crossed his face, quickly masked by his usual charm. "Indeed it is. I have a surprise plan that I believe will delight everyone." "How thoughtful," I said, squeezing his hand with just enough pressure to make him wince. I too had prepared something special for the occasion. Before he could question me further, my father called for everyone's attention. Standing at the head of the ballroom, Lord Ravian raised his glass in the first toast of the evening. "To my beloved daughter Vaina and her chosen partner, Lord Edric. May their union bring prosperity and joy to both our houses." The assembled guests echoed the sentiment, crystal goblets catching the light as they were raised high. I sipped my wine slowly, watching Edric over the rim of my glass. He seemed distracted, his gaze repeatedly drifting toward the entrance. I knew exactly what, or rather who, he was looking for. Lyrian had not yet made her appearance. According to our original timeline, she would arrive dramatically midway through the evening, dressed to outshine the bride-to-be and perfectly positioned to catch Edric's announcement of their true love. The banquet proceeded with all the expected formalities. Course after exquisite course was served as musicians played softly in the background. Conversation flowed along with the wine, creating a pleasant hum of sound that filled the massive hall. To any observer, it appeared to be exactly what it purported to be, a celebration of an advantageous match between two prominent families. After the dessert course, when glasses had been filled for another round of toasts, Edric rose from his seat beside me. The moment had arrived, right on schedule. In my previous life, this had been where my world shattered. Now I watched with clinical detachment as he prepared to set his plan in motion. "My lords, ladies, and honored guests," he began, his voice carrying easily across the hushed room. "I stand before you tonight overcome with emotion." A murmur of appreciation rippled through the crowd. Edric was known for his eloquence, and many expected a heartfelt declaration of love for his bride-to-be. "The path of true love is rarely straight," he continued, his expression shifting to one of noble suffering. "Sometimes the heart leads us in unexpected directions." The door at the far end of the banquet hall opened and Lyrian made her entrance. As I had anticipated, she wore a gown of pale gold that made her auburn hair gleam like fire. Jewels glittered at her throat and wrists, the overall effect calculated to draw every eye in the room. "Ah, Lady Lyrian," Edric said, his voice warm with false surprise. "Your timing is impeccable." A confused murmur ran through the guests as my sister made her way toward the head table, her walk the practiced glide of a woman who knows she is being admired. In my previous life I had sat frozen in shock and growing horror. This time I simply smiled and rose to my feet. "Before my sister joins us," I said clearly, "I believe I mentioned I too had something special prepared for this evening." Edric's head whipped toward me, his expression suddenly wary. This was not in his script. "Lord Belwick," I called, addressing my father's solicitor who stood near the entrance, "would you be so kind as to distribute the documents?" The elderly solicitor nodded briskly, signaling to several assistants who began moving through the crowd, handing sealed envelopes to key guests. Guild leaders received them, as did noble peers, foreign merchants, and representatives of the royal court. "What is this?" Edric hissed, all pretense of affection gone from his voice. "Merely some information I thought our guests should have before your announcement," I replied pleasantly. "Please continue with what you were saying about the path of true love." Around the room, The sound of breaking seals was followed by gasps and muttered exclamations as the contents of the envelopes were revealed. I had prepared the documents carefully, each one containing evidence of Edric's fraudulent business practices tailored specifically to the recipient's interests. For the guild leaders, proof of his manipulation of import tariffs. For the nobles, records of his misrepresentation of property values. For the foreign merchants, documentation of his double billing practices. "Vena," my father said quietly from his place beside me. "What have you done?" "I have merely ensured that Lord Edric's true character is known before he makes his dramatic declaration," I replied loud enough for those nearby to hear. After all, a man about to break his engagement to pursue his true love should be judged on the entirety of his actions, not just his romantic gestures. Lyrian had reached the head table, her triumphant smile faltering as she registered the changing atmosphere in the room. "What is happening?" she whispered, looking from me to Edric in confusion. "Justice," I answered simply. Edric's face had drained of color as he watched his carefully constructed world begin to crumble. Several of the guild representatives were already conferring in urgent whispers, while a royal court official was making notes with a grim expression. "You cannot prove any of this," Edric said, desperation creeping into his voice. "These are forgeries, malicious fabrications." "Are they?" I countered. "The guild auditors might disagree, especially after they examine the accounts I have identified. As might the royal tax collectors, once they review the discrepancies in your declarations." He turned to my father, who had been reading his own copy of the documents with increasing alarm. "Lord Ravienne, surely you do not believe these lies. Your daughter is clearly deranged with jealousy, inventing slander because she discovered my feelings for Lyrian." My father looked up slowly, his expression hardening. "Is that what this dramatic interruption is about? You intended to disgrace my eldest daughter by announcing your affair with her sister. At her own engagement banquet." Lyrian stepped forward, her golden gown catching the light. "Father, you do not understand. Edric and I share a love that transcends conventional boundaries. Vena was never right for him, too cold and practical. Our souls are truly matched." "Your timing is unfortunate," I said mildly. "Had you waited even one more day, you might have discovered that I dissolved our engagement 3 days ago." A collective gasp went up from the guests. Edric stared at me in disbelief. "That is impossible," he stammered. "I would have been informed." I smiled, reaching into the hidden pocket of my gown to withdraw a folded document bearing the royal seal. The paperwork was processed with unusual speed, thanks to certain irregularities discovered in your business dealings. The authorities were most interested in reviewing your records. "You are lying," he insisted, though doubt had begun to creep into his voice. "Am I?" I turned to address the assembled guests. "My lords and ladies, I must apologize for the deception. This gathering was never intended to celebrate an engagement, but rather to serve as a formal announcement of its dissolution and the pending investigation into Lord Edric's commercial enterprises." Chaos erupted as the implications sank in. Merchants who had invested with Edric began shouting questions. Nobles who had lent him their social support withdrew to the edges of the room, distancing themselves from the growing scandal. The royal officials conferred urgently before approaching Edric with stern expressions. Through it all, I remained standing calmly at the head table, watching as the carefully constructed lie that was Edric Valerian's life collapsed around him. Lyrian, suddenly aware that she had tied herself to a sinking ship, began backing away, her golden gown no longer seeming triumphant, but merely gaudy in the harsh light of revelation. "You have destroyed me," Edric said quietly when the royal officials had finished informing him he was under investigation and would need to surrender his business records. "No," I replied, feeling a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with love and everything to do with justice. "You destroyed yourself the moment you decided I was nothing more than a stepping stone to wealth and power." I turned away from him then, facing my father, who was watching me with a mixture of shock and grudging admiration. "I believe our guests could use some reassurance, Father. Perhaps an explanation that, while Lord Edric's business dealings are under investigation, the Ravian family enterprises remain stable and secure." He nodded slowly, understanding perfectly what I was asking. With one final glance at Edric, now surrounded by angry merchants demanding explanations, he stepped forward to address the crowd. I did not stay to hear his speech. My work was done. Slipping quietly from the banquet hall, I made my way to the terrace, breathing in the cool night air with a sense of completion. Behind me, I could hear the continued commotion as Edric's world imploded. Before me stretched a future entirely of my own making. Lady Vena, I turned to find Baron Thelix standing in the doorway, his expression thoughtful. Baron, I acknowledged with a nod. I trust you found the evening's entertainment satisfactory. Illuminating would be a better word, he replied, moving to stand beside me at the balustrade. You planned this meticulously. Justice requires careful preparation, I said simply. He studied me for a long moment. I admit I had underestimated you. Many of us had. That will not happen again. I smiled, accepting the compliment for what it was. Sometimes being underestimated is the greatest advantage one can have. From inside came the sound of raised voices. Edric's protests rising above the general din, followed by the authoritative tones of the royal officials. The endgame was playing out exactly as I had orchestrated. What will you do now? The Baron asked quietly. I looked out over the moonlit gardens, feeling lighter than I had in 2 lifetimes. Begin again, I replied. On my own terms. The days following the banquet brought a storm of scandal that swept through the capital like wildfire. Edric Valerian, once celebrated as a brilliant businessman and desirable match, found himself at the center of multiple investigations. The Merchants Guild revoked his membership pending a full audit of his accounts. The royal tax collectors descended upon his offices, confiscating ledgers and correspondence. Former business partners hurried to distance themselves, each more eager than the last to provide evidence of his fraudulent practices. I watched it all unfold from the quiet dignity of my father's estate, where I had taken up residence following the dissolution of my engagement. Lord Ravian, after his initial shock, had embraced my actions with growing pride. For the first time in my life, I saw my father look at me not as a daughter to be married off advantageously, but as a worthy heir to the Ravian name and fortune. You have your mother's spine, he remarked one morning as we reviewed the latest reports of Edric's downfall over breakfast. She too could be ruthless when betrayed. I smiled, accepting the comparison as the high compliment it was. I learned from both of you. Father's business acumen, mother's unflinching resolve. News of Edric's arrest came 3 weeks after the banquet. The evidence against him was overwhelming, much of it provided by former associates eager to save themselves by turning witness. The charges included fraud, tax evasion, falsification of documents, and misappropriation of guild funds. Even with the best legal representation, he faced years of imprisonment and complete financial ruin. Lyrian's fall was less dramatic but no less complete. Our father, disgusted by her betrayal and embarrassed by her public display, had given her a choice: immediate and permanent retirement to our country estate or complete disownement. She had chosen the former, departing the capital in disgrace, her dreams of social triumph shattered beyond repair. I felt no triumph in my sister's humiliation, only a distant sadness for what might have been had she chosen loyalty over treachery. In my previous life, I had loved her despite everything. That love had died along with my former self, replaced by a cool indifference that was perhaps the most complete punishment I could inflict. 6 months passed. The scandal gradually faded from society's collective memory, replaced by fresher gossip and newer disgraces. I devoted myself to the Ravian family businesses, introducing innovations and expansions that doubled our profits within the first quarter. My father, increasingly impressed by my aptitude, formally named me his heir and business successor, a position traditionally reserved for sons or sons-in-law. You have proven yourself more worthy than any man I might have chosen, he announced at a family dinner attended by our closest allies and associates. The Ravian legacy will be safe in your hands. I accepted the honor with appropriate gravity, though in truth it meant less to me than it once would have. My rebirth had taught me that true power lay not in titles or even wealth, but in knowledge and the willingness to act decisively when necessary. It was on a crisp autumn afternoon, almost exactly a year after the fateful banquet, that I received an unexpected visitor. I was working in my father's study, reviewing trade agreements with our partners in the eastern provinces, when Thessa announced that Edric Valerian was requesting an audience. He awaits in the small parlor, my lady, she said, her expression carefully neutral. Shall I send him away? I considered the question. In my former life, I would have either refused to see him out of fear or eagerly welcomed him out of lingering love. Now I felt only curiosity. I will see him, I decided, but have 2 footmen stand ready outside the door. Edric had changed dramatically in the months since his arrest. The confident, handsome nobleman had been replaced by a haggard stranger in threadbare clothing. His once immaculate hair hung lank around a face that had aged years and months. Only his eyes remained unchanged, still calculating even in defeat. "Lady Vena," he said, attempting to summon his old charm as he bowed. "Thank you for agreeing to see me. I did not invite him to sit. What brings you here, Lord Valerian? I understood you were still awaiting trial." "Released on bond," he explained, his voice rougher than I remembered. "Thanks to the generosity of an anonymous benefactor. How fortunate for you." He studied me, perhaps searching for some sign of the woman he had once so easily manipulated. Finding none, his shoulders slumped slightly. "I have come to ask for your help," he said bluntly. "My situation is desperate. All my assets have been seized, my accounts frozen. The evidence against me ensures conviction unless I intervene." I finished for him. "Is that what you expect? That after everything, I would use my influence to save you?" A spark of the old Edric flared in his eyes. "We had something once, Vena. Despite how it ended, there were good times, real feelings. Were there?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Or was I always merely a means to an end for you?" He hesitated too long before answering, and in that pause, I had my truth. "I did care for you," he said finally, "in my own way. Your way being the path of least resistance to my family's fortune and connections. I observed without rancor. Tell me, how is my sister faring these days?" His expression darkened. "Lyrian refuses to see me. Claims I ruined her life when it was she who pursued me relentlessly." I laughed then, genuinely amused by the predictability of it all. In my first life, they had united in betraying me. In this one, they turned on each other the moment adversity struck. "So having been abandoned by your true love, you returned to the woman you discarded," I summarized. "Hoping her lingering affection might save you from the consequences of your actions." "Not just for me," he said quickly. "For Lyrian too. She suffers in that country exile, wasting away from boredom and regret. One word from you could restore her to your father's good graces. And what would I receive in return for this extraordinary generosity?" He straightened, a shadow of his former confidence returning. "My eternal gratitude, my unwavering loyalty. Perhaps in time, even a reconciliation. We were good together, Vena. We could be again." I studied him silently, marveling at his audacity. Even now, facing ruin and imprisonment, he believed he could charm his way back into my life and fortune. In my first lifetime, his betrayal had destroyed me. In this one, his desperation barely moved me. "There was a time I would have given anything to hear those words," I said finally. "I loved you so completely that I would have forgiven any transgression, accepted any excuse." Hope flickered in his eyes. "Then you will help." "That time is long past," I continued as if he hadn't spoken. "The woman who loved you died the night you chose my sister. The woman before you now sees you exactly as you are, a fraud who built his life on deception and manipulation." His face hardened. "You have become cold, Vena. This vengeance does not suit you." "This is not vengeance," I corrected him. "It is justice. You are facing the natural consequences of your own actions, nothing more." "So you will do nothing?" He took a step toward me, desperation making him reckless. "After all we shared, you would watch me rot in prison while your sister withers away in exile." "I would," I confirmed, "and I will. Your fate is entirely of your own making, as is hers." For a moment, I thought he might lunge at me, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. Then, perhaps remembering the footman outside, he controlled himself with visible effort. "I never truly knew you," he said softly. "No," I agreed. "You saw only what you wished to see, a knave girl easily manipulated for your gain. You never bothered to look deeper. And now I see you clearly. A man without honor or substance, built entirely of charm and deceit. There is nothing there worth saving." He flinched as if struck. "You will regret this hardness, Vena. Someday you will look back and wonder what became of the woman who could love so fully." "That woman served her purpose," I replied calmly. "She taught me what to value and what to discard." His final appeal exhausted, Edric had nothing left but impotent rage. "You think you have won, don't you? Sitting in your father's house, counting your fortune while those who wronged you suffer." "I have neither won nor lost," I told him. "I have simply survived and learned, something you might have done had you valued truth over convenience. I moved to the door, signaling our conversation was at an end. Goodbye, Edric. I wish you the strength to face what comes with dignity, if not grace. He had no choice but to leave, escorted firmly by the waiting footman. I watched from the study window as he walked down the long drive, his shoulders hunched against the autumn wind, a solitary figure diminished by his own choices. 2 days later, my father informed me that Lyrian had requested permission to return to the capital. She claims profound remorse and a desire to mend our family bonds, he said, his expression skeptical. I assume Edric put her up to this during some clandestine communication. Undoubtedly, I agreed. What will you tell her? That depends, he replied, studying me carefully. This is your victory, daughter. I will respect your wishes in the matter. I considered the question carefully. In my first life, I had been destroyed by their betrayal. In this one, I had orchestrated their downfall. Neither extreme had brought me peace. Invite her to return, I decided, not to the main house, but to the dower cottage. Let her prove her remorse through actions rather than words. My father nodded approvingly, measured justice. Your mother would be proud. Lyrian arrived a week later, humbled in appearance if not in spirit. Her once glorious beauty had faded during her country exile, her fashionable clothes replaced by simpler garments. But her eyes, when they met mine, still held a calculating light that confirmed the wisdom of my caution. Sister, she greeted me, attempting to embrace me as if the past year had never happened. How I have missed you. I accepted her embrace briefly before stepping back. Welcome home, Lyrian. I trust you find the cottage comfortable. It is adequate, she replied, a hint of her old petulance showing through. Though rather isolated. Isolation provides excellent opportunity for reflection, I observed. Something we all need from time to time. Over the following months, I watched as Lyrian attempted to rebuild her position in the family. She was dutiful in her attendance at family functions, modest in her requests, and careful to show appropriate deference to both my father and me. To the casual observer, she appeared the model of sisterly repentance. I was not deceived. Behind her performances of contrition, I saw the same self-serving calculation that had led her to betray me in the first place. She was merely biding her time, waiting for an opportunity to regain her former status and privileges. That opportunity never came. Edric's trial proceeded without my intervention, ending in his conviction and imprisonment. Lyrian, learning of this final defeat of her ambitions, abandoned her pretense of reformation and left the city without farewell, reportedly taking ship for the southern continents where her scandal was unknown. I felt no satisfaction in their final departure from my life, only a quiet relief. The cycle that had begun with betrayal and ended in death in my previous existence had been broken. I had written a new ending, not perfect but undeniably mine. On the anniversary of what would have been my wedding day, I stood alone in the gardens of the Ravian estate, watching the sun set over the city that had witnessed both my greatest humiliation and my most complete victory. Are you content, my lady? Baron Felix asked, joining me on the terrace. Over the past year, he had become a valued advisor and perhaps something more. Content, I repeated, considering the word. Not precisely, but at peace with what has happened and curious about what comes next. He smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. That sounds remarkably like wisdom. Hard won, I acknowledged, but worth the price. We stood in companionable silence as darkness fell, the city lights beginning to twinkle below us. I thought of the woman I had been in my first life, so trusting and so easily broken. I thought of the woman I had become in this second chance, stronger but perhaps harder than necessary. And I wondered about the woman I might yet become, now that vengeance no longer defined my purpose. That woman remained unwritten, her story just beginning. As if reading my thoughts, the Baron offered his arm. Shall we go in? Tomorrow promises to be a busy day. I took his arm, turning away from the view and toward the warmly lit house. Yes, I agreed, tomorrow always does.